We're going to read some of Pedro Mir, in both the original Spanish and in my English translation. And the plan is to then talk about translation and then to have a conversation to open it up. So let me just say that this book that was published just this year is actually a republication of the collection published in 1993. And that collection from 93 is the result of my work with Pedro Mir, which I began in 1980, in the 1980s. And I started corresponding with Mir in the late 1980s. I had sent him a translation of the Contracanto. He said he liked it very much and he wanted me to publish it. So I kept working on Mir. And for me, Mir was part of a larger translation project to translate Latin American poets who are engaged with what it means to be in the New World, the Nuevo Mundo, and that experience, not limited to the Dominican experience alone. And Pedro Mir is amazing because his poetry, much of it, really embraces the American continent from the south to the north. And Whitman, of course, did much the same himself, and embracing the New World from the south to the north. And when Jose Marti reported on seeing Whitman reading in New York City and his famous essay, it started a tradition of engagement with Whitman among poets and writers in South Spanish America. Of course, South America, some people speak Dutch, some speak French, and I'm sure Whitman is there as well. So we're going to read some selected sections of the Contracanto. And this poem was originally published in 1954. And Pedro Mir told me that Whitman became a very important person for him. And why is that? Reading Whitman, it's clear that he is embracing and including everyone in the New World. And so Whitman's famous poem, Song of Myself, that appeared in the 1855, the first edition of Whitman's collection, Leaves of Grass, runs throughout the countersong. And I want to just share with you, read to you some of Whitman from Song of Myself. It opens this way. And I should note that when the New York Times reviewed Whitman's book, when it first came out, they said it was trash, like a pig rooting around. It was vulgar. Why? Because he was not following English models. And in his famous picture that he has of himself in the book, he's not wearing a tie and a black coat. He's standing there with his shirt open, and he's like this with his hat onto the side looking like this. He's the father of U.S. poetry. Song of Myself. I celebrate myself and sing myself. And what I assume, you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my tongue formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old in perfect health, begin hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad, I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature, without check, with original energy. And then in section 24, there are 52 sections, like 52 weeks of the year. And Pedro Mir echoes this throughout the Contracanto. Walt Whitman, a cosmos of Manhattan, the sun, turbulent, fleshy, sensual, eating, drinking, and breeding. No sentimentalist, no stander above men and women or apart from them. No more modest than immodest. Unscrew the locks from the doors. Unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Whoever degrades another degrades me. And whatever is done or said returns at last to me. Through me the afflatus surging and surging. Through me the current and index. I speak the password primeval. I give the sign of democracy. By God, I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms. And then in section 51, he says this very famous line. I am large. I contain multitudes. So first, you'll hear the Spanish of Pedro Mir, and then my English version.
Yo, un hijo del Caribe, precisamente antillano, producto primitivo de una ingenua criatura borinqueña y un obrero cubano, nacido justamente y pobremente en suelo quisqueyano, recogido de voces, lleno de pupilas, que a través de las islas se dilatan, vengo a hablar a Walt Whitman, un cosmos, un hijo de Manhattan. Preguntarán, ¿quién eres tú? Comprendo que nadie me pregunte quién es Walt Whitman. Irían a sollozar sobre su barba blanca. Sin embargo, voy a decir de nuevo quién es Walt Whitman, un cosmos, un hijo de Manhattan.
Countersong to Walt Whitman, Song of Ourselves. I, a son of the Caribbean, Antillean to be exact, the raw product of a simple Puerto Rican girl and a Cuban worker, born precisely and poor on Quisqueyan soil, overflowing with voices, full of eyes, wide open throughout the islands. I have come to speak to Walt Whitman, a cosmos, of Manhattan, the sun. People will ask, who are you? I understand. Nobody had better ask me who Walt Whitman is. I would go sob on his white beard. And yet, I am going to say again who Walt Whitman is, a cosmos, of Manhattan, the sun.
Porque, ¿qué ha sido un gran poeta indeclinable sino un estanque límpido donde un pueblo descubre su perfecto semblante? ¿Qué ha sido sino un parque sumergido donde todos los hombres se reconocen por el lenguaje? ¿Y qué sino una cuerda de infinita guitarra donde pulsan los dedos de los pueblos, su sencilla, su propia, su fuerte y verdadera canción innumerable? Por eso tú, numeroso Walt Whitman, que viste y deliraste la palabra precisa para cantar tu pueblo, que en medio de la noche dijiste yo, y el pescador se comprendió en su carpa, y el cazador se oyó en mitad de su disparo, y el leñador se conoció en su hacha, y el labriego en su semblante amarillo sobre el agua, y la doncella en su ciudad futura, que crece y que madura bajo la saya. y la meretriz en su fuente de alegría, y el minero de sombra en mis pasos, debajo de la patria. Cuando el alto predicador, bajando la cabeza entre dos largas manos, decía, yo, el pueblo entero se escucha en ti mismo. Cuando escuchaba la palabra yo, Walt Whitman, un cosmos, un hijo de Manhattan. Porque tú eras el pueblo, tú eras yo. Y yo era la democracia, el apellido del pueblo. Y yo era también Walt Whitman, un cosmos, un hijo de Manhattan.
So Rosa just read section 9, and what follows from the prologo after that is a history told of the development of the United States from the virgin wilderness that it was so called, and the pioneers moving out west, and the essential factor of self-confidence in I. 4. What has a great undeniable poet been but a crystal clear pool where a people discover their perfect likeness? What has he been but a deep garden where all men recognize themselves through language? And what but the chord of a boundless guitar, where the fingers of the people play their simple, their own, their strong and true, innumerable song? For that's why you, numerous Walt Whitman, who saw and ranted just the right word for singing your people, who in the middle of the night said, I, and the fisherman understood himself in his slicker, and the hunter heard himself in the midst of his gunshot, and the woodcutter recognized himself in his axe, and the farmer in his freshly sown field, and the gold panner in his yellow reflection on the water, and the maiden in her future town growing and maturing under her skirt, and the prostitute in her fountain of gaiety, and the miner of darkness in his steps beneath his homeland. When the tall preacher, bowing his head between his two long hands, said, I, and found himself united with the foundryman and the salesman, with the obscure traveler in a soft cloud of dust, with the dreamer and the climber, with the earthy mason resembling a stone slab, with the farmer and the weaver, and with the sailor in white resembling a handkerchief. And all the people saw themselves when they heard the word, I. And all the people heard themselves in your song when they heard the word, I. Walt Whitman, a cosmos of Manhattan the sun. Because you were the people, you were I, and I was democracy, the people's family name. And I was also Walt Whitman, a cosmos of Manhattan the sun.
Voy a leer la sección 15. Y ahora, ya no es la palabra yo, la palabra cumplida, la palabra de toque para empezar el mundo. Y ahora es la palabra nosotros. Y ahora es llegada la hora del contracanto. Nosotros los ferroviarios, nosotros los estudiantes, nosotros los mineros, nosotros los campesinos, nosotros los pobres de la tierra, los pobladores del mundo, los héroes del trabajo cotidiano, con nuestro amor y con nuestros puños enamorados de la esperanza. Nosotros los blancos, los negros, los amarillos, los indios, los cobrizos, los moros y morenos, los rojos y aceitunados, los rubios y los platinos, unificados por el trabajo, por la miseria, por el silencio, por el grito de un hombre solitario que en medio de la noche, con un perfecto látigo, con un salario oscuro, con un puñal de oro y un semblante de hierro, desenfrenadamente grita yo y siente el eco cristalino de una ducha de sangre que decididamente se alimenta en nosotros y en medio de los muelles alejándose nosotros, y al pie del horizonte de las fábricas nosotros, y en la flor, y en los cuadros, y en los túneles nosotros, y en la alta estructura camino de las órbitas nosotros, camino de los mármoles nosotros, camino de las cárceles nosotros.
And now, it is no longer the word I, the accomplished word, the password to begin the world. And now it is the word we. And now has come the hour of the counter song. We, the railroad workers, we the students, we the miners, we the peasants, we the wretched of the earth, the populators of the world, the heroes of everyday work, with our love and our fists enamored of hope. We the white-skinned, the black-skinned, the yellow-skinned, the Indians, the copper-skinned, the Moors and dark-skinned, the red-skinned and olive-skinned, the blondes and platinum blondes, united by work, by misery, by silence, by the cry of a solitary man who in the middle of the night, with a perfect whip, with a meager wage, with a gold dagger and an iron face, wildly cries out, I, and hears the crystal clear echo of a shower of blood that relentlessly feeds on us, ourselves, among the docks receding in the distance, ourselves, below the skyline of the factories, ourselves, in the flower, in the pictures, in the tunnels, ourselves, in the tall structure on the way to orbits, ourselves, on the way to marble halls, ourselves, on the way to prisons, ourselves. And this poem concludes with a response to verses Whitman wrote to the poets to come, saying that he expects the main things from the poets of the future, that he started something, but he's not finishing it. And Pedro Mir embraces Whitman's call, arouse poets to come, stand up, you must justify me. And so time goes by with Pedro Mir, a busy man writing all kinds of things, poems, nonfiction, essays about art. And his final poem that he published in 1998 is an elegy to the Puerto Rican poet Julia de Burgos. The poem is a Julia sin lágrimas, to Julia with no tears. And we're going to read some sections of it, and that will bring us to our conversation about this crazy thing of trying to create what a master artist, poet, wordsmith has done in Spanish, and to create an equivalent of it somehow in English or Chinese or Icelandic or Polish or Russian. But it happens.
So I'll read section 1 and 2 of A Julia sin lágrimas. It starts with an epigraph. If you want
Yeah, it starts with an epigraph, and the epigraph is a few lines from one of the most famous poems that Julia de Burgos wrote, which she published in 1938 in a collection. It's called Julia de Burgos. And the poem is a key to what Mir is doing in his elegy. So here, so Rosa, please read the first section of it. Of Julio.
Sí, okay. This part.
Yeah.
Ya las gentes murmuran que yo soy tu enemiga, porque dicen que en verso doy al mundo tuyo. Mienten, Julia de Burgos, mienten, Julia de Burgos. La que se alce mis versos no es tu voz, es mi voz porque tú eres ropaje y la esencia soy yo. Y el más profundo abismo se tiende entre las dos. Tú eres fría muñeca de mentira social y yo, viril destello de la humana verdad. Tú, miel de cortesana e hipocresías, yo no, que en todos mis poemas desnudo el corazón. Tú eres como tu mundo, egoísta, yo no, que en todo me lo juego a ser lo que soy yo.
To Julio de Burgos. Now people are spreading a rumor that I'm your enemy, because in poetry I show the world who you are. They lie, Julio de Burgos. They lie, Julio de Burgos. The voice rising in my verses isn't your voice, it's mine. Because you're the costume, and the essence is me. And between the two of us lies the deepest chasm. You're just a cold doll of social falsehood, and me, the virile sparkle of human truth. You, honey of courtly hypocrisies, not me. I bear my heart in all my poems. You're like the world, selfish, not me. I gamble everything to be what I am. And then the poem closes with these lines, and Cynthia will read the Spanish.
Cuando las multitudes corran alborotadas, dejando atrás cenizas de injusticias quemadas, y cuando con la tea de las siete virtudes, tras los 7 pecados, corran las multitudes contra ti y contra todo lo injusto y lo inhumano, yo iré en medio de ellas con la tea en la mano.
When the multitudes run rioting in the streets, leaving behind ashes of burned injustices, and when carrying the torch of the 7 virtues, the multitudes run after the 7 sins against you. And against everything unjust and inhuman, I'll be right among them, with the torch in my hand. So, there's not just one Julia de Burgos. And this is Pedro Mir's intervention.
Goes, por un camino de sal que tiene el sol se llega al mar Caribe. Por un camino de sol que tiene el mar, entonces Puerto Rico. Y pronto, porque el aire es transparente y el agua clara. Y además está muy próximo Santo Domingo. Ciertamente se hace necesario conocerse a sí mismo y jugárselo todo. La moneda en el aire y el instante del vuelo en el tapete rojo que cubre los tejados. Y hasta el bastón callejero de los faroles nocturnos en los costados de las aceras de la ciudad. Si es necesario para no disputarse consigo mismo, porque ya está muy cerca, el cementerio de Carolina en Puerto Rico, y allí reposan juntas Julia de Burgos y Julia de Burgos, a quien también llamaban Julia de Burgos. Porque en las 1001 noches todo es mentira, y Julia de Burgos nunca será Julia de Burgos. Porque si hay una cosa jamás controvertida, es que Julia de Burgos era inexorablemente Julia de Burgos. Cuando miró hacia el mundo y se tiró a la calle, con un río en la mano, que era su látigo, y una tea en la mano, que era su pueblo, porque era entonces la verdadera Julia de Burgos. Porque era entonces por lo emancipado y por lo independiente, y no por lo triste y lo desgarrado, ni por lo disipado desgarradoramente, Julia de Burgos.
By a road of salt that belongs to the sun, the Caribbean Sea is reached. By a road of sun that belongs to the sea, then Puerto Rico, and fast, because the air is transparent and the water clear. And what's more, Santo Domingo is right nearby. Of course, it becomes necessary to know yourself and gamble everything. the coin in the air, and the time of its flight over the red carpet covering the rooftops, and even the walking stick of the nocturnal streetlights along the curbs of the sidewalks of the city, if it is necessary for not arguing with yourself, because the Carolina Cemetery in Puerto Rico is very close. And there, Julio de Burgos rests together with Julio de Burgos, who they also called Julia de Burgos, because in the 1001 Nights, everything is a lie. And Julia de Burgos will never be Julia de Burgos. Because if there's one thing that can't be denied, it's that Julia de Burgos was unstoppably Julia de Burgos. When she looked at the world and took to the street with a river in her hand, that was her whip, and a torch in her hand, that was her people. Because then she was the real Julia de Burgos. Because then she was for emancipation and for independence, and not for sadness and tatters, nor for dissipation being tattered, Julia de Burgos.
In part 2. Y tal fue la voz que alimentaba el eco, y tal el ruido de la semilla hasta hacerse arrozal. La multitud de voces que la garganta puebla y el sudor de los ríos para volverse niebla, y las manos sonoras y las bocas, y tal el desparpajo de la competencia nupcial del río grande de Loíza, que en su secreta alcoba la niña borincana se hizo poeta, y en su secreta alcoba se hizo borincana, y no por nacer ni por establecerse antillana, ni porque en sus corrientes inscribió su apellido, y se lanzó a cantar y se olvidó del olvido, sino porque en los coros de la aurora trigueña su voz hizo a Puerto Rico más puertorriqueña, y a Santo Domingo más voluntarioso, y tal fue la bulliciosa espiga de su verso inmortal, que al fin nos hizo a todos más puertorriqueños, a condición de hacernos más voluntad que en sueños, y a convertir en roca las iras de cristal.
So this section of the poem is alluding to the second most famous poem by Julia de Burgos, which is her poem El Rio Grande de Luisa. And hers was the voice that fed the echo and sow the popping of seed destined to be a rice field. The multitude of voices that populate her throat, and the sweat of rivers turning soon into mist, and the resounding hands and the mouths, and so her very daring poise at the bridal competition of the Rio Grande de Luisa, in whose secret bedroom the Borinquen girl became a poet. And in its secret bedroom she became Borinquen, not by birth, nor just by growing up Antillean, nor because she wrote her name in its currents and started to sing and forgot about oblivion, but because in the choirs of cinnamon-skinned dawn, her voice made Puerto Rico more Puerto Rican, and made Santo Domingo more strong-willed, and so it was the noisy bell tongue of her immortal verse that ultimately made us more Puerto Rican, on the condition we become more will than daydreams, and turn our crystal angers into rock.
Sección 6. Ahora no venga nadie a la Quinta Avenida a mirarla dormida en su cuneta. Ahora no venga nadie. Dado que todas las puertas aletearon como una bandada de cernícalos, ahora no venga nadie. Apenas abrió la boca y se la atragantaron. De amores desgraciados le arrebataron de las manos la tea. Empujaron su río a desembocar en el mar. El mal y tú, de los grandes amores y de los martirios personales que llamamos amor y a veces agonía. Ahora no venga nadie. Nadie, ahora no venga Julia de Burgos, victimaria, a recoger las lágrimas de Julia de Burgos, su víctima, para hacer collares y adornarse con ellas, para morir de amores todas las tardes, antes de la verbena, junto a la ventana. Ahora no venga nadie. Ahora, por favor, que no venga nadie. Nadie. Y decididamente no. Y no por las razones de inefable sí, sino por las razones del inconmovible no, por las razones cristalinas y traspasadas por el sol del mediodía, del imperturbable por qué no. Vendrán los días y las melodías sobre los rompevientos y las hortalizas. Mi prima Eloísa se quitará la ropa y se hundirá desnuda en el río grande, de Eloísa y Carolina, su compañera. Vendrá del cementerio conocido con Julia de Burgos desencadenada. También el capellán de la policía y el encargado de los pasaportes le tomarán el brazo y su brazo libre seguirá siendo libre, para que entonces en la plataforma de los ferrocarriles salten de pronto libres todos los brazos. ¿Qué de cosas hacen ustedes con la poesía? ¿Cuánto les gusta ver a un poeta suicidarse?
Don't anyone come now to Fifth Avenue to look at her sleeping in its gutter. Don't anyone come now, given that all the doors flap like a cast of hawks. Don't anyone come now. She barely opened her mouth and choked on unhappy loves. They grabbed the torch from her hands. They forced a river to empty into the sea and you, of the great loves and great personal torments we call love and sometimes anguish. Don't anyone come now. No one, murderer Julia de Burgos, don't come now to gather the tears of Julia de Burgos, your victim, for making necklaces and adorning yourself with them, for dying of loves every evening before the verbena next to the window. Don't anyone come now. Please don't anyone come now, nobody, and decidedly no. And not for reasons of the ineffable yes, but for reasons of the unshakable no, for reasons crystal clear and pierced by the midday sun of the impassive because no. Days and melodies will come over the windbreaks and vegetable gardens. My cousin Eloisa will take off her clothes and sink naked in the Rio Grande. De Luisa and her girlfriend Carolina will come from the famous cemetery with Julio de Burgos unchained. Likewise, the police chaplain and the passport officer will take her by the arm, and her free arm will keep being free, so that on the train platform, all of a sudden, all arms will break free. You readers make up so much about poetry. You really do like to see a poet commit suicide.
Vendrán las mariposas de las factorías, pero una vez más, cuidado, cuidado con el cuidado. Julia de Burgos, cuidado con el suicidio. La humanidad no se suicida. La humanidad es una enredadera. Solo trepa y se agarra a las paredes, muertas y las llena de flores sobreentendidas. Julia de Burgos, cuidado con Julia de Burgos. América Latina, cuidado con América Latina. Lo demás es una sombra cualquiera. En el fondo del corazón, las sombras danzan una alegre contradanza. Y una vez más volverá Julia de Burgos a bailar con Julia de Burgos la alegre contradanza de la vida.
Shadow in the pit of the heart. Shadows whirl doing a merry contradance. And Julia de Burgos will be back dancing once again with Julia de Burgos, the merry contradance of life.
I can't help but notice how that line, the verse that we read from Whitman, that I am large, I contain multitudes, just sort of hovers over both of the poems, that El Contracanto of Whitman and the poems to Julia de Burgos, in the sense of that each, Julia de Burgos being multitudes, being just sort of the different aspects of Julia de Burgos, but also how Pedro Mir is taking on not just the pueblo, but also these other poets as part of himself as well. It just stood out to me as you were reading, and I'm listening.
And since I come from Whitman, since I was introduced to him when I was 12 years old in my home, and because I was sort of an other growing up in Catholic Buffalo, New York, Whitman has always been central to me. And that Whitmanian quality of the multitudes and that embrace are aspects of Pedro Mir that attract me to Pedro Mir, and also motivate me to want the English speakers to be able to appreciate Mir with my humble approximation.
Mm-hmm. And Mir's approximation to the Song of Myself starts off being humble, right? In that introduction, that preamble that we also read, he's like, I understand if nobody knows who Pedro Mir is. No question that people would know who Whitman is. So he's also very humble approaching this poem, although as you keep reading, he asserts himself.
And he is responsible for the countersong, Pedro Mir. He recognizes the hour as it's a new hour.
And grants himself the authority to say, I'm going to tell you what Whitman is, because sort of part of the point of the poem is also that Song of Myself has sort of lost its original meaning, and he wants to kind of recuperate that sense of empowerment that poem has given people, especially in Latin America and the U.S.
Yeah, especially Latin America, so he is furthering that tradition that Martí initiated in the 19th century. Neruda did the same, and Borges the same with Whitman. And so so I've been following Whitman as, into my incarnation as Pedro Mir. Been following Whitman. And I grew up as a typical gringo, so to speak, in that Latin America, to me, was just the stereotypes from Hollywood. Zorro, or Juan Valdez, with the coffee commercial. I mean, I had no idea about Latin America until I went to college and became friendly with Elliot Weinberger, who was translating Octavio Paz, and sitting around reading literature from the boom. And that's what brought me into Latin America, and recognizing that we in the North need to know about the South and what's happening. And of course, I'm including the Caribbean as well. So I have to say, as we talk about translation, that Pedro Mir's letter to me in response to my translation, he was so smart and kind. He told me that my translation surpassed the original poem, that it was better. And I felt, God, I can do this thing. And so he encouraged me to do that. And I suspect that there are other smart authors who want to be translated, who know when to tell their translator, it's better than what I did. Keep going. Because translators of literature face obstacles in this culture when it comes to publishing and how the work of a translation is valued. And in the marketplace, books of poetry translated, it's a good thing I have a day job. Otherwise I wouldn't live. So, Cynthia asked me earlier, how do I get inside the poem? And if a translator is not inside, then the translation itself is not deep. And my answer to her was simply that I spent so much time with the poem and reading slowly because I'm not all that fluent in Spanish. I'm looking up every word, or I'm thinking about, I'm assembling the poem word by word and thinking about every single element, even the word de. Is it by, of, from? Mm-hmm. What is it? And what is it best here in this translation? And ultimately, what sounds good? Because translations are not made by dictionaries, and there has to be a musical quality. Clearly, the music of Pedro Mir's poetry, I can't do that. I mean, his language is a different instrument and different tonalities. But I have to do something of equal musical value to make the translation a poem.
But as a translator, you become a writer. This is a creator. This is you are in a way, I mean, not a writer, an author, because you are translating this piece and you becoming part of that piece. You are no longer Jonathan. You are not me, but you are not Jonathan. You are becoming something else. And as author, you have some privilege because you get into the poem with all the psychology of the poem. You get into the anatomy of the poem. You understand?
I
what I'm
understand
saying?
perfectly.
Because you go inside with all the elements, and yes, I believe that the translator reads and reads and reads, and he gets to know the poet.
And I'm doing this not by myself alone. That I discussed the poem with my friends.
It's hard. Translation is hard.
Translation is hard. She agrees.
No pasa nada.
No me lleva la atrás, pero qué cara de cansancio.
Woke up crying.
Oh,
She got it.
she got it.
The pain of translation.
But every translation is written twice. It's first by the author, and then by the translator. And it's important for the translator to know when to break away from the original words, when it's necessary to take a creative liberty in order to be faithful to the poetic quality of the original work. That's very important, and it's true that a translator, unlike an author, does not have to suffer writer's block.
The material is in front of you.
The material's in front,
It's in front of you. Yeah.
but there are words that have so many possibilities, and it can be as painful as a writer dealing with a writer's block, because not knowing how to recreate, I mean, when everything seems to fail. So there's that torment for translators who struggle with words. And for example, in this book, there's an epigraph in Spanish only, the short poem, a beautiful sonnet, Viaje a la Muchedumbre. I was trying to translate it into English, and everything sounded bad. Everything. And I thought, well, let's just use it as an epigraph, a foreign language kind of epigraph, and actually let readers know that that Pedro Mir is not writing in English, but so that's why that poem is there, because it was not possible for me to give birth to an English version.
Sorry, when it comes to, I mean, some would say Pedro Mir has poesía comprometida, right? Like political poems. Does that make it easier or harder to translate? Because then you have perhaps a clear message that needs to be delivered. Oh, I mean, what does that do? What does that do for the process of translation? To know that there's a kind of a political, a social impulse that's guiding that particular work.
Well, it's true that there's the poems that I've translated are largely political, but they have sections that are purely poetic and lyrical and have nothing to do with political reality. He will play with words, and he will take a Spanish word and take it apart and repeat it and just play with it. So what's a translator to do? If you're literal, it's nothing. So then I have to play. I have to find a way to play to let English readers know that here is playfulness. And so there's a wonderful short section in Julia, isn't it? It's section 8. Section 8. If you could read section 8, it's short. Yeah.
Por el estricto rostro de las avellanas, las aves llenas, las avenas finas, por el laberinto de las caracolas, las claras colas y las islas caras, por el limpio espejo de las caravanas, las vanas caras y las carabinas. Now I'm curious.
So what's happening here? Well, there's word play. So my attempt is, and again, it's been said that translation is never finished, only abandoned. By the strict face of filberts, full birds, fine milled oats. By the labyrinth of seashells, shelled seas, and steep islands. By the clean mirror of caravans, vain faces, and carbines. So the image is one at the end of a militant situation with guns. But I'm not even sure how close I am. I mean, if he were alive, I could ask him questions. But as I say, I was trying to be playful and take words apart. Filberts? Full birds? Does the Spanish even allow filberts and full birds?
Probably not. But probably depends.
This is one reason why a translation sometimes should not be in a bilingual format. Let the English or Russian or Chinese stand on its own. And don't publish a bilingual version so that you're thinking that this will help readers to read the Spanish. So they can read the English and then they go to this thing, because that generally doesn't happen. But yeah, so I mean, a bilingual version. I mean, for this book, you can ignore the English if you don't want to read it. You got the Spanish here, and this stops, with the poems in the 1970s, because when Donald Walsh died in 1980, he was a friend of mine. He was an old guy, a Spanish teacher. Who always told me, Only translate what the poet says, not what you think the poet wanted to say, just what he said. And I didn't exactly agree, but that's what he translated. And so it stops because that's, you know, the manuscript was done and it just lingered and floated around, and then finally a publisher, Azul Editions, did the book in 1993. But that's why it's not, doesn't have the more recent, the later poems.
Let me ask a question. Because when you was in grade school, they never taught you anything about poetry. We never learned anything about poetry. You might hear Walt Whitman, but you don't hear, you know, any, like, from grade school on, until you got to college, or high school maybe. But in college, that's when you start learning Walt Whitman, but nothing about poetry. Then never in the curriculum, only the, what they call book by Fenimore Cooper, Herman Melville, Moby. That's all you learn, but you never. Now that I, you know, and I came here in 1952, and I went to, you know, grade school all the way to college, and basically nothing about poetry until later on. You know, when you hear about Lorca, and then when you start reading, you say, oh, because he got killed and all that. Then when you start, you know, looking into it, but that was never taught in grade school.
Absolutely.
I don't know why, you know.
Look, poetry is not in a capitalist, industrial society, material. Poetry, inner life, it's not good for workers. It's really not good for workers.
Oh, okay.
Now look, when Pedro Mir died, the president of the Dominican Republic declared 3 days of national mourning. When Walt Whitman died,
Right.
there was nothing. Out of curiosity, I went to the New York Times about the period when he was old to see what was there about the great poet. And to fill space, you would see every once in a while a little article about Whitman in Camden, New Jersey is having brandy and oysters for breakfast. A little filler, but nothing about, I mean, he was part of that, you know, wider public that they would put him in the New York Times. A little article to fill some space, but there was nothing, I think, from, you know, the White House about Whitman. And it was the 1960s, the 50s and 1960s where there was a counterculture here, where poetry became an important thing. And a resurgence of poetry and returning poetry, taking it out of the university and, you know, giving it to people.
Puerto Rican Poets Cafe.
Yeah, the Puerto Rican Poets Cafe in New York.
Right, that's how you.
But also the Cuban Revolution has a lot to do with that, what was going on in Latin America, the boom was also significant at that moment.
And you see in countries like Nicaragua, where poets like Ernesto Cardenal are flourishing, part of that his flourishing has to do with poetry as a vehicle for uniting people and for revolution and for saying things that can be defended as such as poetry, and for sharing ideas that are revolutionary but are not obvious as in, you know, an essay or an article in prose. So poetry had a great significance in throughout struggling countries. Same true in Russia in the Soviet age, where poets are joining you know, people together by you know, attacking the values of the regime, but they're doing it through indirectly.
Yeah, I would like to say something about that Pedro Mir was a case, a very particular case, because he was declared national poet. Because the state don't usually declare mourning, national mourning, for writers. But for him, it was a special case. But I agree with what you said about how poetry has been used as a vehicle, not to move the some of the struggle, no, that these countries are having. Like Pedro Mir was a case.
In the case of Pedro Mir, his poem, Hay un país en el mundo,
Yeah.
colocado en el mismo trayecto,
Right.
no? That was very significant for Dominicans, okay? Because that brought us together. And like I told you, I read this poem when I was 14 years old in high school in the Dominican Republic. But this was extremely important. And then publishing, every time Pedro Mir wrote a poem, that was published as a book. Hay un país en el mundo is a book. Contra Canto a World Movement is a book. That was the way he did it. And we wouldn't see that in the newspaper. It was very weird that we would not see a poem by Pedro Mir in the newspaper. Okay? But it was a book. Most of the time it was not published in the Dominican Republic. It was published outside.
The contrasong was published in Guatemala.
In Guatemala, yes. They were published outside the Dominican Republic. Why? Because we all know his political affiliation, and he was not well accepted. He was persona non grata. However, that was for the government, but for the people, it was a different story. And then we, as teenagers, we sang that poem, Hay un país en el mundo, you know? And then this is what brought us together. And we had in trouble here because we have a couple of poets, Dominican poets. We gotta be very careful what we say.
Claro.
I think,
But they know the
I think
story.
you were pointing out something very important, that in Latin America, the revolution happened through literature. And that didn't happen in this country, and definitely it's not happening now. But the role of the poet was to raise consciousness.
And you see, Whitman wanted to be a poet like that.
Mhm.
He wanted to be a bard,
Right.
bardic
Correct.
bard. He wanted to be like that. He wanted to be like Pedro Mir.
Mhm.
And Pedro Mir became a bard. And Pablo Neruda, a bard.
Correct.
And both Mir, Neruda would go into factories and read. And the workers,
Right. They were the voice of the people.
they wanted to listen. If you had a poet go into factories, you know, I mean, in Michigan, you know, I mean, for lunch, I mean, are you gonna get an audience? Yeah, so, so, yes.
Sorry, can I ask a question along the same lines? Just what you said before about poets having to be indirect or being indirect, maybe for political reasons. And maybe, I don't know if this is too specific a question, but I'm just wondering, in Mir's, and maybe between everybody's knowledge, in Mir's trajectory, he went into exile during Trujillo's regime, and then came back, and only then was, right, when was he made the national poet?
1982.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, how explicit he was, given that he didn't only write poetry, that he wrote nonfiction, you know, a lot of it, and only like one novel, I think, but for the most part, you know, was he a threat? How explicit of a threat was he considered to be? And in terms of his exile, you know, I know he traveled a lot when he was in exile, and it seems like, you know, from the talks yesterday as well, like he was okay economically, like he could handle it, he had the resources to do that, and then to come back, once it was no longer as much of a political threat. But I guess I'm wondering how explicit his politics really were, and if that was manifest in his work, in his writing, or it was just kind of everybody knew what his affiliation was. Was he active in like anti-establishment movements? You know, because the sense that we got yesterday from a number of the talks is that he was clearly not a fan of Balaguer, and he was clearly not a fan of Trujillo. You know, but he sort of had to toe the line a little bit because he was there, and you know, he wasn't going to write a polemic, like, you know. And I guess I'm asking from the perspective of somebody who's more familiar with the work of Rodolfo Walsh in Argentina, who was much more direct in his problems with the government that he would, and stayed in Argentina, right, even when things got very, very ugly. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe just what you can tell from the poetry. I don't expect you to maybe talk too much about his actual politics and how active he was and in what ways, but whether you can glean that from the poetry and the nonfiction.
Here's your answer.
He was explicit.
Yeah.
Everybody knows his affiliation. Everybody knew his ideology. His poetry cannot be separated from his activism, and also he is from San Pedro de Macorís, and all Dominicans know what San Pedro de Macorís means in terms of politics. What was the dynamic in that town, and he was so familiar with the position of the United States in relation to the Dominican Republic. How that town was controlled by the United States because it was a town of the sugar mill. Okay, so he knew that. His father worked also in the sugar mill industry, and I believe his mother was a teacher in the town. So everybody knew, you know, and he came from that tradition, and he was against the Trujillo regime. It was not new to anybody. Economically, he was never well. Okay, I remember my family from San Pedro de Macorís lived like 5 houses from the Mir house. So I know my family talking about the family. So this was not new, like I said, and there was no way for him to survive in the Dominican Republic if he would have stayed, like many other. And Mary is here, she can confirm that. He will not survive. He returned, yes, he returned. And he returned as a professor. He was teaching at the university, and that was the time when he was able to be more in peace and to create. He wrote a lot while he was in Cuba. Then he returned to the Dominican Republic.
And he stayed with family in Cuba.
With family, yes. It was not. It's not that he was living the Dolce Vita in Cuba. That was not the case. It was very hard for him. And even when you go to Cuba, you see the house where he used to live. You know, still there in Havana. So it was. Even though he also lived in Santiago de Cuba, but he spent more time in Havana. And I cannot read Pedro Mir poetry or his work without thinking about his activism, because it's there. And even though he writes in a very simple language, it's not easy. You have to get inside that text. Like I told Jonathan, you have to get into the anatomy of the text to really, really understand and see from where his philosophy, you know, his philosophy is so, is the humanism of him is there, you know, and he felt for the countries and for Latin America, all countries in Latin America, and he also felt for the United States, the workers in the United States. He couldn't separate that.
So he makes very clear his political position in the closing lines throughout his poems, but in the closing lines of the counter song, he says, "Oh, Walt Whitman of aroused beard, here we are without beards, without arms, without ears, without any strength in our lips, spied on, read, and persecuted." And that red is, I mean, is a flag. And other poems. So he put his life at risk by writing such things and being in the Dominican Republic. And for example, with Ernesto Cardenal in Nicaragua, you know, a lot of his poems were explicitly attacking Somoza. And I said, how can you write this? And he's a Catholic priest. He said the country, I'll never forget, he said the country fanatical Catholics. Like you don't kill a priest.
Right.
That is, you don't kill a priest unless you really, really, really have to. Then you kill a priest.
Yo creo también
But all
que
Latin America was under dictatorship. So the only one I think was Mexico, where you could, most of the people would go to Mexico. Every other place, you know, it's all what? So, you know, if you want to get this, you can't go there. 'Cause, you know,
yo creo que algo muy importante es que tenemos que ubicar la época donde él escribió, cuando él escribió lo que escribió, porque era una época realmente fuerte en la República Dominicana. Y era atreverse nada más a decir lo que dijo, a tomar la voz del, porque él fue la voz del pueblo realmente. Él habló de las plantaciones, que la mayoría de los dominicanos ni siquiera pensábamos en eso. Él habló de las comunas, él habló de muchas cosas. Y ese poema de él como que nos abrazó a todos. Y yo diría que abrazó a América Latina entera, porque él fue la voz no solamente de la República Dominicana, sino la voz de América Latina. Él trascendió. Todavía excúsenme porque me siento muy contenta de escucharlo traducido, porque para mí es la primera vez que yo escucho la voz de un dominicano, que en Estados Unidos ahora se tomen el tiempo de hacer este trabajo, personas que no son dominicanas y personas que son dominicanas también. Ayer fue un día maravilloso y hoy también me siento muy agradecida porque estoy trabajando ahora con un grupo de jóvenes que miren lo que, nacidos aquí, y ellos dicen que son escritores dominicanos, para que lo sepan. Esa jovencita que está ahí, las nuevas generaciones, esas son las voces de Pedro Mir también, que aunque no lo sepan, y escuchar que en estos momentos que está viviendo América de Estados Unidos, Norteamérica, porque a veces se creen los americanos que todo es América, y no, hay América Latina, hay América del Sur, hay América del Norte, hay otras Américas, no solamente esta, pero aquí se está viviendo momentos muy difíciles y ver que el racismo y la discriminación contra nosotros ahora es horrible. Entonces ver voces que están surgiendo y que están diciendo, no, nosotros no estamos de acuerdo con eso, y sacar a nuestros muertos y revivirlo.
But,
So many.
yeah. But Mir in Translation, that's the title of our discussion, and we've shared with you Mir in Translation and talked about it and demonstrated it. And I'm hoping that Mir in Translation will find a wider audience in the English-speaking world. It was very nice that People Tree Press in England republished the 1993 book. It's a press dedicated to Caribbean literature, and it's a great thing. But readers of poetry in the United States need to appreciate that there's not just Pablo Neruda, there's Pedro Mir.
Yeah.
And City Lights Books in San Francisco last year published one of Pablo Neruda's very early books. But they had the manuscript of my translation of Julia and the Hurricane Neruda, and they didn't. They're trying to sell books. They want Neruda could, any word from Neruda's mouth will sell.
Right.
Right.
But to introduce a poet like Pedro Mir and to show people why he should be published and why he should be read, and that Latin America has produced, it's Neruda, it's Vallejo, it's hundreds of master poets. And in 1967, Mario Vargas Llosa was winning a prize, and he did something brilliant. He mentioned the Peruvian poet Carlos Oquendo de Amat that nobody had heard of. And so he was using Vargas Llosa, that opportunity, to put the spotlight on a young poet who died young. And as soon as Vargas Llosa mentions him, boom, we see a magnificent reproduction translation of a book called Cinco Metros de Poemas. The original Spanish folds out the Cinco Metros. And the English translation folded out to 5 meters, or how many yards. But, and it's hard.
You might find maybe the short story La Mujer by Juan Bosch.
Oh,
You find that.
Actually, yeah.
But after that, and then
O La Nochebuena.
yes, that translation tends to Margarita Fernandez Olmos. She did that, and I know that she fight a lot to have that short story in an anthology, but it's very hard. But I hope that more people like Jonathan continue doing this kind of work. I know it's not easy to translate and to talk about that. It's not easy to do this, and it's not easy to translate Pedro Mir. I know that. It's not easy, but you did it, and I'm so happy.
Thank you very much.
I am so happy, but we need more of our writers, authors to be translated.
Thank you.